you have to be successful at recruiting and retaining talent. If you can't recruit talent, you simply can't succeed in this, because you just can't make mistakes on the team when it's early. Or if you do make a mistake, you've got to move very quickly, because with the team, 1 + 1 + 1 has to equal 10. And it's very different in a larger established company. You can make a lot of mistakes when you have an installed base, and you can have a lot of bad management for a while before it even is visible.
Welcome to the Your Seat at the Table podcast with your hosts, Idea Monkey Mike Maddock and ringleader John Tobin. We're two founders, a serial entrepreneur and a billion-dollar operator, who talk to leaders about how, when, and why they made their most pivotal decisions in life. Join us as we share wisdom, mistakes, and a few laughs, learning from the brightest minds in business today.
Hey everybody, welcome to Your Seat at the Table. Thrilled to host today an amazing person, friend, board member at our company Slalom, John Connors. John, welcome to Your Seat at the Table.
John, thanks very much. And Mike, it's great to join you as well.
So, John, as someone that has had a really rich history, especially in technology, I want to take the audience a little bit through kind of your career, eventually dive deeper into some of the big things that happened in your career, as well as the decisions you had to make along the way. I think people may know that you were one of the early CFOs in Microsoft and saw amazing, tremendous growth. Kind of want to dive into that and how you got into that role and some of the different roles, because I saw and know from your past that, and Microsoft does a pretty good job of this, of like balancing, like moving people around and positioning them for different executive positions. And then you got into venture capitalism and started two different companies in that. So I kind of want to dive deeper into each of those paths of your life. And overarchingly, I've always respected, with you, since I've known you for about 7 years now as a friend of Slalom, you're an amazing leader. Like, you're an incredible leader, I think, leader of technology, but I think in general, more of a great leader of how to think about running big companies, small companies, even startups. So I hope you share with the audience a lot of your leadership wisdom along the way.
Well, thank you, John. Pleasure to be here, as I said.
So with that, John, if you don't mind, take us back to kind of early days. You grew up in Montana, and what was that like? Did you have a big family, small family? Were you on the farm, or like what were the days like that, early days?
Yeah, it's I feel very blessed with the family I came from, and just sort of the period of time I grew up and where my family came from. My grandparents were both Irish immigrants to Butte, Montana, and my grandfather was an underground copper miner in Butte. And at the time, Butte was known as the richest hill on earth. It was an enormous copper find that basically was instrumental in electrifying the United States, because copper was needed for the electrical build out. And then my father was a typical, first generation. He went to college, became a teacher and a coach. And the street he grew up on in Butte, there's 7 or 8 legendary football coaches that came from that same neighborhood. And then my folks moved to eastern Montana, where my dad coached at a Catholic high school, and it's a famous cow town called Miles City. Anybody that knows the story of Lonesome Dove, the book or movie, where I grew up is the end destination of Lonesome Dove. So it's big cattle. It was big cattle and horse raising region. And anyway, he coached at a Catholic high school. We had a big family, 7 kids. He coached other big Catholic families. And, very early on, that's where I really learned a great deal about leadership, because he was a phenomenally successful coach. And, I think when he retired from coaching, the team had won 89 straight conference games without a loss. But more importantly, he was a great man and a great leader. And, a teacher and coach at a Catholic high school doesn't make a lot of money. And my mom stayed home until the youngest of our 7 siblings went to school. And then she became a newspaper reporter in this little town. And we weren't wealthy, but we were the wealthiest family in town, I always felt like, because of the life we led and the impact that my parents had. But, one of the things, because we had a bunch of kids, we'd go to practice every night with Dad. And that was sort of babysitting for Mom. And I got to be around that from the time I was a little kid. And he was just phenomenal at motivating, teaching, very clear when things weren't done right. There's a great saying that clarity is kindness. And I think that was, I saw that early. But then because of my folks' network, I got to growing up, it was so easy for me to get a job because my family had a good reputation and you were just expected to work. So from a junior high age on, I worked on these big remote farms and ranches, and that was the first introduction really to entrepreneurs because we weren't a business family. But working on these big places that were 50 miles from the nearest town and learning how these people ran these operations and fixed everything that needed to be fixed and worked from dawn to dusk was amazing. And then in the summer, I worked on oil rigs or worked on the Burlington Northern Railroad. And so I had a great work ethic, and I just learned a lot about how things worked. And then I went to college at Montana and Missoula thinking I wanted to be a lawyer. Started out in that field study, but then added accounting. And then by the time I graduated, I thought, well, I'm just going to go to work as an accountant, and got hired by Deloitte in Seattle. And that was a fantastic experience. That led to getting hired at Microsoft after a couple of other stints because Bill Gates' sister worked in the tax department at Deloitte, Seattle. And so Deloitte people got hired in this little company called Microsoft. And so I joined when it was about 200 million in revenue and in 89. And when I left in 2005, I think the forecast for the next fiscal year was going to be somewhere around 50 billion. I can't remember exactly. So one thing I tell every young person I meet, if you're going to join a company, find something that's growing because it produces just enormous opportunities. And I got a large number of opportunities in that company. And then in 2005, I joined a partnership in Bellevue, Washington, Ignition Partners, doing venture. Did that, have been doing that since, and then helped two young guys that I hired launch their own firm called Fuse, and I'm helping it with that. And so I'm working on venture stuff and family stuff. So it's been an amazing journey, and have had just a lot of fun all along the way.
That's awesome. Great overview recap. I want to dive into some of the different roles that you had, especially at Microsoft. And that growth is crazy. Like, think about that, 200 million, which is, not tiny by itself, but then to get to 50 billion is like you weren't, when did you go when did Microsoft go public?
It went public, I think in 86.
Okay, so you guys were public already.
Yeah, it was already public, yeah.
Got it. And so maybe talk a little bit about, you were corporate controller and then CIO, is that right? You were, did you get moved into the CIO role? Is that right?
So basically how, I started out in finance, and then within about 18 months of joining Microsoft, I got hired to be the staff person for this guy named Steve Ballmer, who was running the systems division, and worked with Steve, and in the systems world, that was languages, hardware, it was Windows, it was DOS, it was this thing Microsoft was working on with IBM called OS2. So I worked with Steve on just anything he needed me to do. Then he moved over to run sales. I moved with him. and worked on a couple big things, incubating the licensing program, incubating the channel program. From there, I moved to Europe to work for the president of Europe, who reported to Steve, helping him run day-to-day European operations, and then also helping to get Microsoft Ireland set up. And while I was there, it was supposed to be a 2-year stint living in Paris. After about a year, I got brought back to Redmond to be controller. And largely what had happened is the company had grown so fast that the systems and processes and people at finance hadn't been built as quickly. And we'd just come off a very bad budget process with the tools and the process not working very well. So I became corporate controller. That was the first time I ever managed a big group. It was probably 175 people. And we did a big project to basically shut down all the AS400s and MacPack software. You'd know MacPack software, John,
Yep.
from the
Yep.
Anderson AC days.
Yep.
And anyway, we built one instance of SAP in Redmond, and then we built all of the data warehousing and analytics around it. And there were two really talented people that led that project that were in my group. Well, it worked, it was successful. And so then at that time, Bob Herbold, the chief operating officer, and Bill and the exec team said, hey, well, you should move into the CIO role.
Okay.
And I was very reluctant because I wasn't a technologist, and the prior two CIOs had gotten fired. And so the whole notion of CIO, the term career is over, everybody's familiar with that. But I took on became the CIO in, I don't know, it was 94, 95. And it was actually a real advantage to not be a technologist, because what I learned real quickly was that being a CIO is a very demanding general management job. And a big part of it is technology, but a big part of it is project management. A big part of it is working with each business on what are their strategies, plans, and priorities. And most divisions in a company don't have very good strategies, plans, and priorities for their technology investments. Finance is always pretty good, but beyond, finance and operations groups are usually pretty good because they understand systems and they think systematically. But if you're talking sales or HR or other groups, they just don't think that way. And so it's a big general management job. Another big challenge that Microsoft faced was everybody thought, oh, these IT guys are a bunch of idiots. We're spending all this money on technology and their stuff isn't stable and blah, blah, blah. Well, it was an interesting era because Visual Basic for applications had been released, so it made it really easy to build these really cool applications with a great UI. But the back-end systems were SQL and NT that at that time were not very mature. And even the entire client-server architecture of Unix and Oracle, while more hardened and more mature than SAP and NT, that client-server stuff in the early days was not very stable. Well, you could build all these apps, but keeping them up and running was very difficult and expensive. Mm-hmm. And so everybody thought, oh, these guys are a bunch of idiots. Because why can it cost so much when we have so much instability? And I had that attitude when I went in, and what I realized real quickly was, no, these guys aren't idiots. They're very smart. There is a lack of general management leadership in the ranks to actually fight the fight with the product groups, with sales, with finance. So we shored up the management team with stronger leaders. And then we had this really interesting session with Bill and Steve and the product leaders, and then a group of IT leaders where we'd done a study to really determine, hey, what's driving our costs and what's driving downtime? And what we concluded was, hey, there were lots of things we could fix in our processes and whatnot. But the biggest issue was our core enterprise, Microsoft's core enterprise software products weren't mature yet. And so we had this session, and we're about the first hour, the IT team and me are just getting yelled at the whole time. And then the last hour, you could really see that Steve and Bill were understanding what was being explained, and that these enterprise IT people actually knew more about enterprise computing and its combinatorial and permutation complexity than the individual product groups understood. And the last half hour was basically the product guys getting yelled at for how bad their stuff was. And so we introduced this concept called eating our own dog food. And from that point forward, for certain classes of Microsoft products, they couldn't be released and for sale to customers unless IT had signed off on them. And that really was a transformational change in how IT worked with the product organizations. And then we also made a giant investment in upgrading the worldwide network and our data center architecture. It was really transformational for how Microsoft IT worked. And it was really a fun period. And towards the end of that, I ended up spending a lot of my time in sales, because the sales team started to use Microsoft IT as the largest demonstrable example of Microsoft enterprise computing. And so that led to a stint in the sales world.
Okay, that's how you ended up in the Worldwide Enterprise Group. That makes, I was trying to figure out that jump, except for, again, that concept of building sort of the ultimate executive by bouncing them around a little bit, which seems always
there wasn't much design. I don't think it was designed. I think it was like, hey, this group also has a problem. Seems like you might be the right person to try to see if you can fix it.
That's really cool. When you think of, from a leadership standpoint, jumping into that CIO role, and then you're sitting with Bill and Steve with the different product teams, describe your leadership style and how you handled that. And were you, like, you come across to me like just always excitable, like you're excited, but like you do have this calm to you. And so, like, is that calming presence, is that part of it, that like you're kind of in listening mode, but or do I have that right? Or like maybe just explain a little bit your leadership style in dealing with especially those personalities and kind of people coming at you almost aggressively.
Yeah, it's that's a really great question, because I think I'm less volatile with more maturity and experience and age and hopefully grace. And
I think we all are.
Yeah, and
I think we are.
Microsoft was a fast growing company that was pioneering a lot of stuff with very brilliant and hard charging people, and it wasn't for the faint-hearted. I'll just say that. But it also, I learned really early that you couldn't let yourself be bullied at that place, or you stood no chance. And actually, I was really lucky. The work that I did as a kid, working on farms and ranches, and I can remember running a swather for the first time on a big 14,000 acre wheat farm up in the.
What is a swather?
Oh, it's a hay cutter. You cut hay with it.
Thank you.
And we're out in the middle of nowhere, and Alfred Jordan, it was his place. And anyway, so I'm running it, and he pulls up, and he's just fuming. And the engine in the back of the unit is starting to smoke. And he comes up, and he shuts it off, and he's going crazy. I said, well, what's the matter? He goes, this thing's going to blow up. And he looks at the heat gauge, that like you have in your car, and it's pegged to red. Well, I didn't know to look at the heat gauge. And the shaft from the hay cutting had covered the exhaust of the engine, so it was about to blow up. And he went ballistic on me. And you're 16 and you're 50 miles from the nearest town. Well, that's good for you in some ways. And similarly, when I worked on the railroad or in the oil field with these very talented men that knew how to do extremely dangerous, hard work, but you're a college boy and you're going to take a lot of guff from those guys. That was fantastic, because then you get to Microsoft, and physically, the people there aren't very scary. Mentally, yes, but so you learn not to be bullied, but also was so fortunate that Bill Gates, and he was just brilliant at talent. That as a CEO, he had many gifts, but he was brilliant at talent and promotion of talent and getting teams to work. He had hired a guy named Bob Herbold as the chief operating officer, and Bob was the only silver-haired person out of the entire executive team. He'd come from Procter & Gamble, where he ran both technology and marketing, which that's a pretty interesting combination.
It's a unicorn.
He's a unicorn. And Bob was from Ohio and had very Midwestern values, but tough as heck, but never flappable. And Bob was my boss about half the time I worked at Microsoft. Ballmer was probably the other majority of that time with a couple of other folks. But Bob was so good at preparing, being organized, and then he was never flappable. And so I saw how Bob operated, and he treated everybody with dignity and with grace. He could be very strong when he needed to be, but he never let the temperature get high in any conversation that he ever had. And I thought, boy, that guy is an amazing model for leadership and for getting things done, because we're all the same. Is the higher the temperature gets and the louder the voices get, usually the worse and fewer decisions that are good actually get made. And so Bob was just amazing for me to learn about how does a dignified and successful executive operate. And he was just highly predictable and highly consistent.
His boss, I believe, was Robert McDonald, who was the CEO of P&G, and Bob McDonald went on to be the head of the VA and runs the Leadership Academy at West Point for young students. Yeah. So there's a tie-in with your Air Force son, et cetera. There's like a military tie-in. I have a question for you. This is just a fun question. In terms of leadership style, how about 3 adjectives to describe yours, 3 words to describe yours, 3 adjectives to describe Steve Ballmer's, and 3 adjectives to describe Bill Gates?
That's good.
Okay, mine would be, I think, hardworking, good pattern matcher, and good at talent spotting.
Great. And Steve?
Steve, brilliant, incredibly effervescent in his energy and his drive. And thirdly, amazing at learning. Amazing at
lifelong
learning.
Learner. Yeah.
Bill,
curious.
Bill, unicorn brilliance in terms of business. The second, I think, would be incredible toughness. And the third thing would be perseverance. All 3, I think anybody that does anything, it doesn't matter if it's in business, if it's in government, if you're a leader of a church, you're an athlete. If you accomplish things, everybody works hard. There's nobody lazy so I don't use hardworking, but those 2 were 2 of the best examples of hardworking people I've ever seen in my life in anything. And when I moved to Venture, not long after I joined Venture, there was a prominent Silicon Valley VC that was here, and I was meeting with him, and he'd been at Microsoft the week before, and this was probably 2006, maybe early 2007, and Microsoft wasn't the stock market darling at that time, even though it was a very important company and doing quite well. But the big growth of the 90s was over, and it was kind of, finding its way in what it was as a stock. And anyway, this VC said to me, "Man, that is the most impressive company of any I've ever been around." And I said, "Well, why do you say that?" He goes, "Well, we were there meeting with an exec on a Friday, and we left at 5:15 and the parking lot's still full." He goes, "You don't ever see that in the Valley." And that comes from those two founders, how hard they worked and their commitment. But it's just like Steve with his learning. It just wouldn't matter what the business was, what the group was. By the end of any session with a company or a group, he would understand how it worked, and what the business model was, what the priorities were. And so, that's something that's so valuable. Is, are you always trying to learn, and do you work hard every day at it? And years ago I bought for our 4 kids when they were little. If you're a football fan, when Notre Dame runs out of their tunnel, there's a sign above the door that they all tap that play like a champion today. Is there a better message for a young person to think about giving their best effort every day than that sign? I'm not sure what it is, but they were people that gave best effort every single day. And that example was phenomenal for the organization when it was small, and it was probably even more important as it got bigger.
Love that. You mentioned toughness for Bill. Can you maybe just dive one click further into that? How was he tough? Just like making a decision tough, or I don't know, and just what he wanted?
I think it's well, first, I think the being a CEO is I don't think people really understand how hard being a CEO is unless they've done it, and it's a very lonely job. And you're going to have a lot of people mad at you all the time, and you're going to have a bunch of people that don't like you, and there's going to be a bunch of people that always question you. And if you're the CEO in an industry where there's already a bunch of incumbents that have power and you're disrupting them, boy, that's really hard. You've got to be really tough to make the decisions. For example, hey, we're gonna bet on Windows versus this thing called OS2 that we could draft behind IBM on. That's a tough decision. When you think about the effort it takes to build an organization in every country in the world, because that's one of the most interesting things that existed about Microsoft. You got to learn so much about every country and every industry and every company in every industry, because every company is your customer. I mean, there's like almost nobody that uses your stuff. Well, the complexity and myriad of problems that creates when you're operating in every country in the world, and every customer, every company in the world, and almost every individual is your customer, is the trade-offs you have to make and the hard decisions you have to make. It's almost unimaginable. Just first of all, how do you manage your time, and who gets time with you and who does not? And if you give time to someone, well, that's the signal to others that, well, maybe your time's not as important, and so therefore is your company not as important. And you have a big treasure, so there's lots of projects being funded. Well, which projects are we going to back? Microsoft could fund way more projects than could be successful, and then picking which of them are we going to back and which are we not, when each of these groups have worked incredibly hard to build something and make a case for it. And that's even before you get into you become successful, you become powerful, you don't build any lobbying in Washington, D.C., and kind of behind the scenes, all your competitors build this amazing force that wants to break up your company. And you got to weather that. So just an amazing toughness. of that was, and then in meetings, how Microsoft, something I really liked was it was all about what's not working in the lowlights, not the highlights. And if you went into a meeting and your PowerPoint had more highlights than it had lowlights, you were going to get eviscerated, because the whole culture was around what's not working, what do we need to improve, not meetings of clapping seals about how great we are. And,
Right.
So it was just this toughness and accountability that he had on himself, that other execs do. If I'm going to succeed, I've got to have a similar toughness and accountability. And so there was a high degree of accountability as the company, even when the company got fairly large. Now it gets harder and harder to maintain that as the layers get built, but they did an amazing job building accountability and results for a long time.
I've not met Bill Gates or Steve Ballmer, but I have watched them, and just check me on this. What I've noticed is that when they are challenged, and they get challenged a lot on panels and on TV and interviews, they both come at challenges from a spot of deep curiosity. It seems to me like the armor, and you can tell me I'm wrong. I know this is right about Bill Gates because I've seen it again and again, where someone comes at him and he kind of goes, well, and he's very curious about the topic that someone's challenging with. Is that what you saw behind closed doors, behind the curtain?
Yeah,
everything rooted in curiosity?
They're both very curious, and and they want to get to root. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They want to get in the details, and it's and they're both, and given the roles they had a wide purview, and they knew a lot, and they were smart, and they were hardworking. So they were very curious to get to the bottom of, well, what's truth, what's reality. And we used to have a saying that was popular is, you've got to be more prepared than they are smart for the meetings, because they're going to go, you don't know where they're going to go deep. But if they do, they expect you to know, because it's your area, not theirs. And so you have high degree of curiosity and high capacity.
Yeah.
What do you think what keeps you going? Like, so at this stage in your career, you could be, I'm certain you could be cruising in a very large vessel off the Amalfi Coast most of your time. Why do you stick with it? Why are you still in the game? What keeps you waking up, getting up in the morning, going, let's go?
Oh, it's a great question. I think there's a few things. One is it's so fun. What we do is so fun, and I get to work with so many young people whose world of the view is a windshield, not a rear view mirror.
Yeah.
They're optimistic and excited, and they're building, and it's so hard. This early stage venture, it's so hard to build a successful company. It's just really hard to get to 10 million of revenue. And
amen, brother.
It's really hard. And so it's
been there, done that.
It's just so fun, because you get to be around young people who are builders, and it makes me excited for life, and it makes me excited for our country, that there's all these great young people doing amazing things. It also, I think, and my wife really is a big influence, amazing lady, but she doesn't want me sitting around the house and not active. She likes it better, I think, if we kind of reconnect every night around 6:00. And so that works well for her, and what works, happy wife, happy life. But I think a third thing was, a few years ago, I was hitting 60, and I couldn't do another because I'll be 67 my next birthday. I couldn't commit to doing another venture fund because they're 10-year lives. And
Right.
so a couple of the young guys that worked for me, they then decided they would start their firm called Fuse, and I'm helping them out. But it was about the same time we had to start. Hey, with our family? What do we do with our family stuff? And my wife and I had a lot of discussion and whatnot about that over the years of how involved and what, if anything, with your children should happen.
Right.
Well, we finally agreed on that, and so we started to talk to our children about it. And by this point, they're all adult age and pretty clear they're not going to be screwed up. They're going to have their storms in life, but they're going to weather them. And they make really good decisions, and they've have wonderful spouses. So, very thankful. But the youngest one, he's kind of a self-starter. He started studying about stewardship, and he read a book by I think it was a guy named Rabbi Daniel Lapin called "Thou Shalt Prosper," and it's about stewardship of wealth, and it's written in a 10 commandment format. And commandment 7 is never retire. So
thou shalt not retire, for thy spouse will be angry.
So Ross, my son bought that book, and he said, "Hey, I think this would be really, really great. You meet with a lot of young people. It's got a lot of advice, but check out Commandment 7." Largely, what it said is, as you get to this season of life, if you have experience, you have a network, you hopefully finally have some wisdom, why would you not use it? And it isn't to make more money. That's not necessarily the goal. But you have all this treasure you've built up. Why wouldn't you use what God has helped you get to this point in this season of life when you never had it in any other prior season? And I thought, man, that is
interesting.
So anyway, so my goal is to keep getting invited to meetings, and when I don't get invited to meetings, I'll know I'm done.
It sounds like you're becoming a coach, John. Like the son is becoming the father.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of the parable with the 10 coins and kind of the talents that you have, and not to waste them, and as well. So
you get to this point where now you learn from your children who are now adults and married and have their families. It's a great season of life that you get to work with the whole spectrum of generations, and we've got our two of our granddaughters on horseback for the first time out of the ranch in Montana 2 weeks ago, and they were 3 and 4 and live in a city, and so it's just amazing this season.
I do look forward to that at some point with the grandkids. Hopefully, be blessed with that.
Yeah.
I want to move a little bit into some of the decision making, John, that you had made throughout your career. So I'm going to take you back, and I'm going to feed off of one of the things you said with the antitrust stuff and the things that were happening in the early 2000s, when right around the time I believe that you took over as CFO, and a lot of that stuff was all happening. Yeah. Can you share a little bit of insight, some of the hard things that were happening, and then how did that impact you as the CFO, and what were maybe some of the critical decisions or critical things that you had to work through then?
Yeah, so it was because I became CFO in early 2000, so it was the .com crash hadn't hit yet.
Yep.
But it was very clear, especially coming from enterprise sales, and Steve had become CEO. It was very clear, hey, the heady growth days of Microsoft are behind us, and this will still be a great company, but it's not going to grow at the rates that the world thinks and analysts think and that people that own the stock might think. It'll still be one of the most profitable companies in the world, and its absolute growth will be phenomenal. But the relative growth in percentages, that decade is over. So there was that. There was also the company didn't really have a new strategy for developers framed, that .NET hadn't been created.
Right.
And there was also the challenge that about, the company had grown employment really fast from kind of 98 to 2000. And so there was, and then early in the decade, and there was about a half of the employee population that had made a bunch of money from stock options and about half that hadn't. And the salaries weren't really high or competitive. And so there was a bunch of issues. There was a lot of senior leadership moving on because they would, they'd worked really hard. They were ready to do something different, and they could. So it was a really difficult first couple of years. And that's probably where I really learned best to just deal with enormous amounts of stress and having to just soldier through. But then we began to work on these 7 different business units, gaming, small business, mobile, enterprise, Windows, Office, etc. And began to kind of organize what was now a big company into more manageable missions and divisions with more autonomy. And, I think in general, that worked out really, really well and the fruit of it is kind of evident now in that Microsoft's an amazing enterprise company, just amazing enterprise software. The gaming business is big. The business around business applications is pretty big. Mobile didn't work out. Search is, Microsoft, I think, has about a $6 billion search business now that's highly profitable. So that did work out. What didn't work out, and in some ways I wish I had got to be like a VC for 6 months before I was CFO, is that there was potential to create a lot of business value with much lower investment than Microsoft invested. Because if you look at a lot of the winners of that space that Microsoft was competing against, Google was a fraction of MSN's size.
Yeah, startup.
And they just moved way faster and had a much clearer mission. And, there's this point at which being small and focused is a huge advantage. And then there's a point at which scale is a big advantage for distribution and sales and marketing once there's product market fit and there's high demand. But a lot of these businesses, looking back, we just wildly overinvested in terms of their cost. And we could have been a much higher performing stock if we'd have invested less in them and incubated them more versus investing so much thinking you can win immediately. But it was hard at Microsoft to get a business to get attention if it couldn't be material within a year or two. Well,
yeah, it's the same problem that P&G has. That's why they acquire
very similar
companies.
Problem,
yeah.
Mike. And so these really promising businesses that the teams do a really good job on, if they aren't instantly a big hit, well, the company doesn't have generally the interest in continuing to fund them. And so, Microsoft was early with a map. It was early with an ebooks. You just go through all these examples. But if it didn't get to 100 million within 18 months, according to the business plan, because you spent enough to get to 100 million, well, then it was like, well, that's a loser. And so that I wish I had more skill, and I wish I'd have learned to reach out to successful VCs then on, hey, how do you incubate these small projects versus us just thinking we had our model and it worked for all these other businesses, therefore it'll work for this. And, one thing I think I've really hopefully learned is with life and with business, just because you were good for some stretch of time or at some job doesn't mean at all you'll be good again and you'll be successful in the next job. You got to get up every day and actually earn it and do it. Mm-hmm. And it's that's a hard lesson. When you get successful, you get egotistical and you get arrogant, and you have a lot of sycophants telling you, things that that aren't necessarily true. And so constantly trying to improve and learn from others is just a really great habit and discipline to try to adopt, even though I fall short of it regularly.
On the flip side, John, is there anything that like you really championed, you really pushed that maybe others resisted, but you sort of pushed it through? I'm sort of curious, like if Avanade was like that a little bit, because I know you were very involved with Avanade, but
Avanade was easy to get done in, I guess, relatively, it seems, largely because there was a lot of respect for Accenture. And we had worked with Accenture a lot. We had hired a lot of Andersen Consulting people over the years. In fact, in my early days when I was controller and CIO, the partner from Andersen Consulting would come about every 6 months and he'd say, "Hey, you guys can't hire any more of our people because
stop hiring.
You stop hiring." And we'd have these agreed 6-month periods. Okay, no more hiring. So we had great respect for them. And secondly, it was also really clear that we wouldn't and couldn't build our own fully integrated, high quality SI. That's a unique skill. And so anyway, and Steve really saw that, and he was president then and building the enterprise business. But again, we made the mistake with Avanade that we repeated multiple times within Microsoft. We way overstaffed it early with too ambitious a plan, too many offices, before we really had the patterns and practices down of what were we going to go to market with. And fortunately for Accenture, Microsoft was eating all the losses in the early days. But I think net result was it was very successful. And then I was on that board for 5 years and got to work with Mitch and the team and Bob Frericks and others as that got built. And it was a very important organization to Microsoft's enterprise success.
Yeah, interesting. Let's maybe jump a little bit to the your VC time, starting at Ignition Partners. And again, with this idea of decision making, did you guys develop a pattern of how you made decisions and which things you went into, or was it more organic on how that evolved, or was it just gut based on the individuals you were working with, or what was the playbook in a way?
That's a really good question. It was a group of very talented and experienced execs from Microsoft and Macaw Cellular that started Ignition.
Okay. Yep.
And so the Macaw team was really expertise in telecom, and the Microsoft group was really expert in both consumer and enterprise software. So that made the categories pretty straightforward. And then it was a collegial these were experienced execs, and so it had a good collegial attitude and was good at making decisions, coming to agreement on what would be invested and what wouldn't be invested in. Picking this stuff, it's just really, the earlier the company is, the harder it is to you just don't have much signal. So it's the people and the idea. And Ignition was a little bit later stage with, they would do a few, not just Series Seed and Series A investments, but a few later stage deals. And, one of the things you have to get used to in this business is, about a third of the things that you invest in, you won't even get your capital back. A third, you'll get your capital back and maybe a little profit, but not enough that you could ever raise another fund. And a third you'll make money on, and a third you make money on, like, if I remember the math right, like 13%, 10% are 90% of your profits. So it's a home run business. And it takes a couple years to see, well, what's gonna likely be a success. But in some ways, I think it's a lot like college football, in that to win in college football, well, now you got to buy the recruits, but you used to have to recruit the players. If you had great players and coaches, you win. The more you win, the more recruits you get. Well, this business is like that. If you have wins, you get higher quality deal flow, and higher quality deal flow leads to more quality deal flow. But boy, you have to work really hard and look at a lot of companies relative to how many you back. And then the really hard thing is these teams work so hard, they're so talented, almost universally they've given up way more guaranteed compensation and benefits than they could be making. The really tough business part of this is when you have to come to the decision, hey, we're not going to invest anymore in this idea and we've got to sell, or you have to go raise more money from someone else. We're not putting more money in. Because in effect, what you're saying is, hey, we no longer believe in the dream. Usually by that time, the team is pretty tired. And then the thing you want to do is find an exit where the team gets paid and they feel like they were treated in the right way by the investors and got a deal out of it that was fair and equitable. But that's the hardest part of the venture stuff is when you decide something isn't going to work and the entrepreneur doesn't agree, and you either have to convince them or you have to tell them, hey, we're not going to put more money in, because it's very personal. It's very personal. Yeah. And so that part is very difficult.
Interesting. What advice would you give entrepreneurs, I guess, John, as you have met so many, like you said, you had to rigorously go through so many meeting different companies. And I get that they're a little bit later stage. Mike's sort of a serial entrepreneur himself and knows and hangs with all these entrepreneurs. And we've had a lot on the podcast. So I don't consider myself an entrepreneur per se. I think that's really Brad, as we've talked about. Yeah. But, I have definitely an idea of it.
Well,
started the consulting business.
How big was Slalom when you joined, John?
Well,
it's pretty small.
Yeah, it was 2 degrees, right? It was 2 degrees, the accounting and finance staffing side. Yeah. So it was about maybe 8 million or so. And then I started the consulting division that became Slalom. So in a way, I'm an entrepreneur, but not in the same classic entrepreneur way. I'd put it that way.
But, I do think
what advice?
Mike made such a good point when we were before the podcast about the CEO profiles, the types, the archetypes.
Yeah.
And for a company to succeed, you have to have both vision and execution. And for the entrepreneur, it just depends so much on, are they a product person, or are they a salesperson, or were they an exec coming into venture? Because it's very different. But the biggest advice is really talent. You have to be successful at recruiting and retaining talent. If you can't recruit talent, you simply can't succeed in this, because you just can't make mistakes on the team when it's early, or if you do make a mistake, you've got to move very quickly, because this magic of this venture stuff is, with the team, 1 + 1 + 1 has to equal 10. And it's very different in a larger established company. You can make a lot of mistakes when you have an installed base, and you can have a lot of bad management for a while before it even is visible. In these early stage companies, you can't make a lot of mistakes, or if you do, you have to move fast. And the productivity and output per person, first of all, you got to be so focused, but then the productivity and output is so much higher than larger companies that you just got to get the talent right. I think the second thing is you have to be an unrelenting, optimistic person, because it's just so darn hard. And you're always selling. You're selling people to join your company. You're selling people to give you money. You're selling people to buy your thing, product or service. I think the last thing you have to be is you have to get comfortable with not being liked, because somebody's always mad at you or disagreeing. You know, your spouse or your partner's disagreeing because you're having to work all the time, and you don't make as much money as the friend who works at Google or Meta or Microsoft or Amazon who works half as much time. Employees are mad at you. Your execs are squabbling. A customer's mad at you. Investors are, you know, when things are going great, they're clapping like crazy. And then the moment it's negative, it's like, why did we hire this bozo? And so that not many people are okay with people being mad at and not liking
Sounds
them.
like a wonderful life. I think I'll try that.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's just a lot of people don't think about it. They think, oh, this is so romantic being the CEO, but there's always somebody that's not liking you every day.
The crown
But you
is
have to have
heavy.
that, and you have to have that grit, I guess.
Oh, the
in a way
perseverance is it's so admirable what it takes. The perseverance gene.
Yeah.
I think so I tell everyone who will listen that I'm a really good starter and a lousy finisher. I think that what I've noticed is that founders get lucky a lot of times by picking a partner. I'll be with, here's a name drop. I'll be with Jim Collins on Monday, and he's, you know, get the right people on the bus.
Yeah.
So you're right with the people, but I think founders who stumble into choosing the right partners early, so Brad gets a John, you know, like you get a visionary who gets a great orchestrator operator, who gets a great rainmaker, who gets a great futurist, who gets a great, you know, that team, when they stumble into the right team and then they jump on a wave that is cresting. Oh my goodness. But to get to 10 million, most companies have to stumble through those partners until they figure out, oh my gosh, we've got the wrong people. We need someone different. And most companies, in my experience, never get there.
Yeah. And I think too, you make such a good point about catching that wave, because you can have a great team and a great product, and the market just might not happen when you build it, or it may not happen in a time frame that you have money. And
it's timing.
It's
you know, it's funny, John. Ellen's John's wife, my sister, once said to me, like, you all moved to Seattle. What, John? 25? Yeah. She said there are a lot of business. She said, like, a lot of business in Seattle that just by being in Seattle, like because think of that town was exploding. And so if you're a landscaper or a real estate developer, or that's, you know, that it's wonderful, but finding that wave, being at the right place at the right time is so critical for entrepreneurs.
Well, and I think too, it's acknowledging that and being, you know, honest about it. And it's like, hey, the timing was great. But I think the other thing about really great entrepreneurs, either stumbling on or finding the right talent, it's then also empowering them to succeed by giving them a wide berth. And you know, because there's a lot of young CEOs that have never managed anything before. So they don't know how you're supposed to orchestrate a team. And those that figure out real quickly how to do that and how to get the best out of each each leader, and getting that team to work together, that's really hard to do. And it's art, not science, in my experience.
Yeah. And talking about your coaching background, John, because I can see it now. I love coaches who take the wide receiver and make him a quarterback. You know, or who take there's a great story. I'm an Iowa State guy. The middle linebacker, or the quarterback became the middle linebacker his senior year. He readily said, okay, I'm the starting quarterback, not anymore. There's this guy named Brock Purdy who's behind me. I'm going to become the middle linebacker. And he set all the records in the Big 12 being the middle linebacker. But credit the coach and the player who could say, you can do this. and you'd be really good at it. And the culture that made it so, like
Yes.
most people would say, I'm leaving, I'm going to go play quarterback somewhere else. But he went and played, and now he's coaching. So I think, John, I want to give you credit. I think you're very good at seeing people and saying, this is the seat for you, not this one. And that is a huge talent that most young entrepreneurs don't have. So we agree.
I think another thing that's really important is in working with people and leading people and working with peers is it's a healthy environment if the leader's decisions, even if you don't like them, they're predictable, meaning, or I understand them. I knew that was the decision they were going to make. What people don't like is inauthenticity and decisions and unpredictability.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's that whole term of I use this term a lot with these young leaders is clarity is kindness. When there's a problem, it's much better to talk about it up front immediately than waiting and thinking it's going to get better. It's be perfectly clear with what it is you're saying and be predictable with your decisions, because teams appreciate that even if they disagree with the decision that's made.
Yeah, I think that's right. Hey, John, I'm the son of a Navy captain, so I'm looking at the time.
Yeah, we are at time.
Do you have
John,
a few minutes?
I do want to ask you real quick, toughest decision that you ever had to make, and then the best decision you ever made, as quickly as
best
just
decision
off the
by far, nothing even close, was getting married to my wife. Nothing's even in the ballpark.
She's listening, isn't she, John? She's in the room, isn't she?
She knows we did this podcast.
Mary and Mike's sister is definitely my best decision.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah, just so grateful. And I think kind of the toughest decision really is to live away from where most of your family is for 40 years. And so, my kids didn't grow up with close. I mean, we got together and they know them and whatnot, but they didn't live with their cousins and grow up with their cousins and with extended family. You know what I mean? And that's a hard trade-off. That's a hard trade-off. And and especially at this 20 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. I would have said, oh, it was some work-related thing. But, these companies all march on. That's just the way it works. But family and family connection and family multi-generational cohesion is so important in this fractured culture we have now. And so that's probably looking at it now, we lived alone for a long time, even though we saw each other and whatnot. And I sure hope my 4 kids and their spouses and our grandkids have a way that somehow, at least some of them, live close to each other and grow generations of children together.
I love that. I want that too, and I did the same thing in terms of moving away, and my kids again had good relationships with like Mike and Mike's kids and their grandparents, but it's not exactly the same when they're right down the street. No. So I'm hopeful I get that opportunity, or my kids get that opportunity as my kids kind of grow up a little bit more.
Yeah.
John, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for the time, all your wisdom.
So great to meet. Hope to connect
great to meet
in person.
you, John. Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.